Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Hello, a very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Chizito. On Spectrum tonight, how did Uganda fare at the just concluded Human Rights Review at the United Nations? Also, what other issues raised that require urgent attention? The human rights situation in Uganda came under review at the UN on Tuesday as UN member states undertook a universal periodic review of human rights situations in all its member states. The review is a unique mechanism of the UN Human Rights Council, which involves a review of the human rights record of all 192 member states once every 4.5 years. The mechanism is based on the principle of equal treatment for all countries, and it provides an opportunity for all states to showcase what actions they would have taken to improve the human rights situation in their countries, but also express commitment to tackle remaining trouble spots. The government of Uganda presented its report, and other countries had the opportunity to raise questions and make recommendations to help advance Uganda's agenda and the realization of human rights. The government of Uganda, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, developed a state report in consultation with key ministries and various stakeholders, which was presented by International Relations Minister Henry Okello Oryem. Non-state actors, through the work of organizations such as HURINET, carried out countrywide consultations, and the views generated were presented to the UN. The UN country team also made an assessment of the human rights situation in Uganda and submitted its observations to the Human Rights Council. The human rights situation in Uganda remains debatable, with government rejecting reports by local and international bodies across about gross abuses. Uganda has been on the spot for a bad human rights situation in northern Uganda and the Karamoja region. It has also been criticized for infringing on political freedoms, illegal arrests, and detention. So tonight we reflect on what happened at the UN and probe the recommendations made thereat. Our guests tonight, I'll ask them to introduce themselves. Please tell us your name and what you do.
Good evening. My name is Paula Simas Magalhães. I work here in Uganda with the United Nations Office for Human Rights.
Good evening. My name is Magelah Peter Gwayaka. I work for Human Rights Network Uganda, HURINET.
I'll start with you, Paula. We would like to get a background to this review. What exactly is it about, the UN Periodic Review on Human Rights?
Sure. The Universal Periodic Review, or UPR for short, is a very new and unique mechanism that's been created by the United Nations. It came about when the Human Rights Council was created in 2006. And the idea here was to really make an equal playing field for all states. So all states would have their human rights records reviewed, regardless of money, power, size, geography. And so this began in 2008. So since the beginning of 2008, every 48 countries have been reviewed every year. And Uganda came in the last year of the first cycle. And this is what happened. So Uganda was brought forward to the Human Rights Council. And the UPR, basically what it does, it takes information from different sources, so the state can present its own report. And then civil society has the opportunity to present various reports as well. And the United Nations also presents its own overview of the human rights situation in that country.
And how did Uganda fare?
How did Uganda fare? It was, from my perspective, it was a very interesting review. If you think that 55 countries took the floor during the review, so that's a quarter of all UN member states, and made very interesting interventions on a wide spectrum of issues, from health to torture to political freedoms. So I think it was very, very productive. In other cases, the engagement level of other states wasn't as strong. So in that regard, I think it was good.
All right, Peter, how did Uganda fare?
Yeah, just like Paula said, it was a good faring. I can give you an example. It's not usual for states like mainly states from Central Europe or South America or Asia, states possibly you might have never heard about, standing up and asking Uganda this is not right and this is right. I'll give you an example like Maldives asking a question, and maybe possibly Ugandans don't know where it even is.
It's a small island.
It's a small island. So that shows there is an international interest in Uganda, and the human rights record in Uganda, of course, becomes a concern for many. Based on the questions and recommendations given, the state didn't perform so badly. I would give ourselves a fair, because there are so many prizes. So many states mentioned things to learn from. For example, they praised the existence of Uganda Human Rights Commission as an independent body.
The government funded body which is supposed to be independent.
Mm-hmm.
The Equal Opportunities Commission, which is fighting discrimination. So there are those positive, although there were other positives, because you'll find if one state is saying, yes, Uganda have done good, you have the Equal Opportunities Commission, but we still have issues of gender and other kinds of discrimination. So that's where the balance comes. Possibly that's why I would say we performed fairly.
And this is a peer review, so it's not the kind of thing people are going to bash saying is from the West.
Yes.
Countries look at each other as equals.
Countries look at each other. Countries look at each other as equals, and the recommendations are for the betterment. It's like, you are my colleague and I think you better improve in this area. It's not like we are bashing you or we are blaming you. It's just put some more efforts to better this.
So that improves its credibility. If the US is sitting across the table with Uganda, it's like one-on-one, they're equals, not speaking down to them.
Yeah, and that
is have some more credibility.
And that is the whole reason why the peer review mechanism was started, because the previous mechanisms, some states felt like possibly if a state has a financial muscle, or if a state has, because you imagine Uganda standing and saying, USA, you should not have gone to Iraq or Iran. That wouldn't be there in the previous.
Right now Uganda can tell
Uganda can tell the US in the UN Council that we recommend you withdraw from that place. So that's what creates the equality.
That's a unique one.
Yeah.
Most likely they talk about NATO and why they went to Libya. Paula, can you talk to us about these multiple reports? You have the Uganda government reporting, like you mentioned, the UN and other people. Why do you have this? Don't they give confusion?
No, I think when you have a variety of sources and voices coming forward, you can have a better picture of what's happening in the country. So if you only had one report coming from one source, it would give their own perspective on how the human rights situation in the country is going. So I think a positive thing out of this whole process actually is precisely that it gives the opportunity for everyone to give their opinion and to exchange those opinions. So when we say that the state did consultations, it means that they actually sat down with civil society and listened to what some of the issues that they've been raising. Now, it might be that the state doesn't agree with what civil society was saying, or it might be that civil society doesn't agree with what the state has been saying. But at least it opens a door of dialogue, and you can actually have a much more, comprehensive view of the different issues in Uganda. So, for example, questions of the pastoralists, of the Batwa, of certain minorities that perhaps wouldn't really have figured in such a review did, because civil society had the opportunity to bring those issues to the UN. So I think that's a very positive element of having different reports, different points of views. So I think in that regard it's not about confusion, it really is about creating more and more dialogue and understanding.
And what did the government say and what did it not say?
I think the government, like most governments, they did a good showing of what are the positive elements that have happened in the past few years. So what are the legal framework, the new policies that the government has created over the years to address certain issues. It recognized certain challenges, and it even stated in its opening remarks that through discussions with civil society and through their own assessments, they recognize that there are several issues. But I do believe that, for example, we were saying that So the review happened, and there were over 171 recommendations made to Uganda.
171
Exactly.
for Uganda.
For Uganda.
Yes.
Of those, the government has already said that it doesn't agree or it doesn't support 19.
Yes.
So it already shows that the government doesn't agree with some of the issues that were raised during the review. So I think it highlights where you could have, again, more dialogue, because it's often a matter of just not understanding or not having the right information.
All right, let's get a little bit more of that. But first of all, Peter, could you talk to us about the 19 that the government rejected?
The 19 that the government rejected, most of them were relating with the issues of the anti-gay bill, punishment of gays.
Yes.
Then a recommendation, I think, on registration of NGOs to be removed from the Ministry of Internal Affairs to a ministry concerned. Maybe to understand it better, NGOs in Uganda, the NGO board sits in the Ministry of Internal Affairs,
True, yes.
which basically is a ministry that deals with security.
Yes.
And these states were saying, NGOs are not part of security. They should belong to a ministry that deals with development. In Uganda's case, I would be thinking of Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, or a ministry along those lines. Of course, government rejected that. They did not agree on that. The other thing they didn't agree on is still with NGOs is the tedious registration process,
yes,
and the permits, which is brought about by the NGO regulations. The government's explanation is that the regulations are enough. What you need to remember is NGOs in Uganda are in the Constitutional Court challenging the same regulations. So I don't know if that informed the government's response.
Yes.
But so that doesn't mean it spells doom to the NGOs move, but they can still continue pushing with that issue. The other issue, possibly, which is a bit more thorny to Ugandans, is the government's. There was a recommendation that the government should not pass the Public Order Management Bill,
yes,
which is I think it's still before cabinet. And government said no, they'll go ahead with it because it's necessary.
It's the one that requires people gathering when you have more than 5 people coming together.
More than 3 coming
more
together.
Than 3.
Yeah.
You have to inform the Inspector General of Police.
Yes. Of course.
It's ridiculous, that one.
It is
obviously ridiculous.
It has ridiculous provisions, but much as the government has rejected it, the government cannot move to legislate to violate people's rights. What this means is the civil society needs to engage government. Possibly,
maybe they should also wake up. It's ridiculous.
The
people gathering tell the Inspector General of Police. Sounds like 300 years ago.
Exactly. Maybe we need to tell government now that the truth be told, we need a law to govern demonstrations and public order.
But not 3 people.
But not 3 people. So what is needed to be done is that law that will necessitate proper operation of that.
So government needs to talk to you in the civil society.
So civil society and government and all the other stakeholders, political players, need to come together and say, okay, yes, there is need for this law, and maybe we can do X, Y, Z. The law should look like this.
Right.
Yeah. I think those are some of the highlights of the things which government did not agree. Something that I needed to talk about also is they accepted 110.
Yes.
They rejected 19, and 42 are to be examined. In other words, government is saying 42 we are open for discussion.
Which are these?
Well, the 42 I can look at some of them, because this report has just come out around 30 minutes back, so I don't have all of them off my head. But I think some of those where government is open is the Press and Journalist Amendment Bill. Is subject for negotiation. Yes. They feel there is need for a law. They feel they can't reject having that law.
Yes.
And so possibly.
So they are open to discussion.
They are open to discussion.
Yes.
The torture bill, because the torture bill is one of those which was asked so predominantly in many of the questions, and government, because the recommendations was government should pass that bill and ratify the optional protocol under the
What does it say?
torture.
That if someone tortures you, you don't sue the police force, you sue the individual. Is that what it says?
Okay, presently we don't have a case, we don't have any, torture is not an offense in Uganda per se. It's not, in the face of the law, it's not a wrong, if I would say that. What the law punishes is the outcome of torture, which means if someone tortured you and maybe psychologically or something, where the outcome is not tangible,
you have no case.
Then he has no case to answer. So the torture bill, which is a brainchild of NGOs, is seeking to punish some of those things. I was using an example, might be that example, though it happened in a private life, but it's torture. There was a case where a man forced his wife to breastfeed puppies. And I think it was 2 or 3 years back. That can be a real case of torture. And if you remember well, the man was released because our laws don't look at that as one of the wrongs you could do. So possibly those are the areas government is open for future discussions.
Listeners, this is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight, how did Uganda fare at the just concluded Human Rights Review at the United Nations? Also, what are the issues raised that require urgent attention? You'll also be able to contribute to this discussion. I'll read out the numbers when that time comes. Paula, could you talk to us about some of these other issues like child sacrifice, which are some of the issues that came up, and safe houses?
Sure. I think there were really a large list of issues that came out. Several to do with harmonization of laws. So in terms of Uganda ratifies these treaties, but never really domesticates them. That means doesn't integrate them into national law. So there were several recommendations saying you should really take on these commitments made at the international fora and make them law domestically in your national legislation. There were several recommendations on improving human rights education in schools, for example, including them in the curriculums, increasing engagement with civil society, involve more minority groups in development plans, so ensure that there's civic participation in the elaboration of these plans. On specific issues, persons with disabilities, domestic violence, child sacrifice, indeed. There's one particular recommendation that says, and it's actually according to the Ugandan Constitution, that cultural practices should really avoid violating the rights of Ugandans. So there has to be a way that you can have awareness campaigns, that you have to engage communities, and if necessary, pass laws that you can have a cultural belief and practice, but avoid them from harming individuals, be them female genital mutilation. There was a lot of recommendations in that regard as well. And of course, child sacrifice, which has been very prevalent in the media these past few days with horrible stories. You had questions of course, torture, as Peter mentioned, questions of right to freedom of assembly, so the freedom of expression, death penalty, right. The right to health, reproductive health care services, so maternal mortality, addressing the questions of maternal and child mortality, having adequate resources invested in education sector, in the health sector. So really, it was really wide, the number of issues that were raised. So I think in that regard, it was very positive, because it shows that Uganda has made definitely significant improvements over the past years, but there's a lot more to be done, and a lot more attention needing to be paid to particularly vulnerable groups in Uganda.
All right, you mentioned cultural practices. Let's talk about FGM specifically, female genital mutilation. What's the gap there? The international community says it should not be practiced. What does the Ugandan government say, and what's the reality on the ground?
I think the governments and the state of Uganda's position in terms of female genital mutilation was expressed by the passing of the act. So making it an offense and saying that we should try to ban this practice. A lot of the recommendations were saying you should start implementing the law, for one, make it much more operational. But also, just criminalizing and repression doesn't work. You really have to engage the communities. You have to engage the children, the girls, the mothers, the fathers, the cutters. So you really have to work with them as well, sensitize, create alternate livelihoods. Because often it's a matter of economic empowerment as well. If your only livelihood is cutting, then you don't want to end that practice. So you have to find an alternate solution. So
Right.
some of the recommendations were in that direction.
So government can actually provide alternative employment or sources of livelihood for some of the people
Exactly.
who are careering.
Exactly.
in
You
some
don't
of these
necessarily always have to go and arrest. You first have to try to change attitudes. A lot of violations in the world is a matter of just changing attitudes.
Right. Peter, I'd like us to talk about freedom of assembly, specifically in relation to walk-to-work protests. But before we do that, let's talk about safe houses. Is it still a serious issue?
Well, it came out predominantly, the issue of safe houses. It was a concern for many states. I remember about 30 out of the 52 states which asked us something about torture and safe houses. So that shows it's a major concern. The government, of course, its response is that they are no longer safe houses. Although many states were saying, okay, can the government pass a law and punish those responsible for torture, or especially the members of the armed forces, the police. I think one state talked about the RRU in Kireka,
Rapid Response Unit.
Rapid Response Unit, which was also considered to be a non-gazetted place. And if I remember, the minister's response was that RRU is part of Uganda Police,
Yes.
and so it is.
It's an official.
It's an official operational place. But I think the problem with that place is
You can't go
their
there.
mode of operation.
Yes, go on.
I think their mode of operation is what creates problems.
We'll talk about
they
that
don't
a little
seem
bit
to
more.
be like the rest of the police.
Alright. They seem to be?
They don't seem to operate like
Like the rest
what
of
the rest of the
Seems
police
to be
we
like
know
a special
operates.
branch operation.
Yeah.
This is Spectrum listeners. We'll be back after the break.
Is your internet provider turning your world upside down? Broadband Company offers fast and reliable internet solutions. And for the first 100 subscribers this month, we offer zero connection fees. Save up to 400,000. For more information on these offers, call toll-free 0800 222 111.
Broadband Company, more than you expect.
I wanna be alive and free.
I wanna be alive and free. I wanna be alive and free.
I wanna be alive and free. I wanna be alive and free. You and me.
Uganda Waraji, the spirit that binds us.
Strictly not for sale to persons under 18 years. Please drink responsibly.
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also helped friends, seeing potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He is just who he is. Special.
So here's to men like John, who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the source. Nile Special, you've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back on the Spectrum tonight. How did Uganda fare at the just concluded Human Rights Review at the United Nations? We're also asking the question, what other issues raised that require urgent attention? Our guests tonight, Ms. Paula Simas, Magalhães, Human Rights Officer at the UN Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights, and Mr. Peter Magelah, Litigation Officer at the Human Rights Network, or HURINET. You'll be able to call in shortly and contribute to this discussion. Peter, can you talk to us a little bit more about the safe houses? You're talking about Abiara review before we left.
Yeah, like I mentioned before I went for the break, the government's response was that they no longer have safe houses.